Good morning. We'll call to order the hearing of the Tactical Air and Land Forces Subcommittee. The Tactical Air and Land Forces Subcommittee meets today in open session to receive testimony on the impacts of sequestration and the Continuing Resolution, CR, its impacts on acquisition, programming, and the industrial base. Before I continue with my opening statement, I want to pause for a moment just to say I voted against this mess. And I voted against this mess because I thought we would be right here, right where we are. With this clock ticking, with 14 hours and 50 minutes until sequestration hits and what I believe will be devastating impacts upon our national security and our Department of Defense. Now, it's noted that there's a pause button there, and I truly believe that the President of the United States is the only one who can hit that pause button. We need him to come to the table with a workable plan, and we certainly are hopeful that once sequestration does hit and the effects that we hear today, that a responsible plan will be brought forward in order to set this off. I noted that in talking to some of the witnesses before we opened that they thought that perhaps this clock was their opening statement clock, but they don't get 14 hours for their opening statement. But I think this demonstrates the fact that it is imminent. It is upon us. Today, the panel that we have that will be speaking will be the last word on sequestration before we're in the post-implementation of sequestration, before we begin to see its effects. And that's why this committee continues its efforts on oversight and our detailed examination of the harmful impacts of the Continuing Resolution and Sequestration on the military's ability to protect national security interests of our nation. We've already heard very candid testimony from the military service chiefs during the full committee hearing on February 13th on how these forced budget cuts will be devastating to military training and force readiness. General Dempsey, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, stated, quote, "We built a strategy last year that said we could execute and absorb $487 billion of a cut. I can't sit here today and guarantee you that if you take another $175 billion, that strategy remains solvent. What do you want your military to do? If you want it to be doing what it's doing today, then we can't give you another dollar." Today, we plan to leverage the information gained from that hearing and provide our members with the opportunity to gain a better understanding of how the CR and sequestration would impact defense acquisition, programs, projects, and activities and their associated industrial bases across the country. One of the most tragic aspects of our current situation is that sequestration was never supposed to happen, and there were numerous opportunities to avoid it. By laying out the details of the impacts of sequestration, the Department of Defense could have helped us in our education campaign to avoid the catastrophic cuts we are now facing. On the eve of sequester, it is my hope that this hearing will aid to provide greater clarity concerning the details and levels of risk that will be associated with the arbitrary cuts mandated by sequestration on all major defense acquisition programs, including how these severe reductions will impact local communities, small businesses, and ultimately the military's ability in meeting the national military strategy. These details will help to illustrate the depths of these impacts and help us make our case to Congress and the nation. And I want to underscore what I just said. The Department of Defense has been very slow to provide information both to Congress and to the nation as to what the impacts of these cuts will be. Because of that, it has stunted the debate and the conversation about how to avoid them, because many of the actual details of their effects could not be evaluated and known. Ironically, the sequestration conversation has been seated in a context of savings and fiscal austerity. However, it seems apparent that allowing these cuts to take place would ultimately cost our country more than it saves, while simultaneously costing jobs. Second and third tier vendors, mostly small businesses, will be affected if these cuts are enacted, many of which are referred to as single points of failure vendors, meaning only one company is qualified to provide a particular part, and once that capability is lost, it will take significant capital and time to regain that capability. This, in turn, will put people out of work and dramatically drive up costs. We need to be assured that the Department and the military services are conducting the appropriate level of analysis to assess the impact of sequester on our industrial base. For example, the Army indicates that every procurement program would be affected, quantities would be reduced by 10 to 15%, and that these mandated sequester reductions affect more than 1,000 companies in more than 40 states. For the Army alone, over 3,000 vendors will be affected. The Army has stated the total economic impact would be approximately $15.4 billion. The Marine Corps, $2.4 billion. The Navy is over $20 billion. I witnessed the devastating effects of these reactions each time that I return home. My community in Southwest Ohio includes Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, the home of the Air Force Materiel Command and the Air Force Research Laboratories. Recent information provided by the Air Force has indicated that over 14,000 civilian employees of the base face potential furloughs. The base provides cutting-edge research and development as well as real-time intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance that enhances the lethality and survivability of our warfighters who are in harm's way. Every state is going to be impacted by sequestration. As I stated before, I voted against this, and I think certainly our discussion today will be incredibly important as we try to learn the information that will give us the ability to advocate for these cuts to be set aside. I would like to welcome our distinguished panel of witnesses. Representing the Army today, we have Ms. Heidi Shue, Assistant Secretary of the Army for Acquisition, Logistics, and Technology. We have Lieutenant General James Barkley, the 3rd Deputy Chief of Staff, G8. Representing the Navy and Marine Corps, we have Mr. Sean J. Stackley, Assistant Secretary of the Navy, Assistant Secretary of the Navy Research, Development, and Acquisition, RDA. We have Vice Admiral Alan G. Myers, Deputy Chief of Naval Operations, Integration of Capabilities and Resources. Lieutenant General John E. Whistler, Deputy Commander for Programs and Resources. And then representing the Air Force, we have Lieutenant General Michael R. Moeller, Deputy Chief of Staff for Strategic Plans and Programs, Lieutenant General Charles R. Davis, Military Deputy, Office of the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Acquisition. We thank each of you for being here. We appreciate that you will, on the House side, be the last word on the effects of sequestration before we're actually implementing sequestration.